Good morning again. Thank you for coming. This is the Feminisms of Color and the Secular Movement panel, and I'm honored to have a distinguished panel of activists, educators, writers, and all-arounds from the secular movement, fractions of liberty. Maggie Ardiente from the American Humanist Association, Ina Daviboy from Free Thought Blogs, AJ Word / Ayana Williford from Secular Sisters, straight out of DC, Deanna Adams from Musings on a Whim, based here in Houston. And I'm going to get more into their bios as we proceed, but I just want to give a brief overview about what's at stake here if we're talking about feminisms of color. We want to talk candidly about feminism and its discontents, because when women of color and white women talk about feminism, write about feminism, live feminism, organize around feminism, there are very different histories and cultural trajectories that are at play. So from the clashes between African American activists and white activists during the abolitionist movement in the 19th century to second wave feminism's disavowal of lesbian African American feminists who spearheaded the Combahee Collective, to third and fourth wave feminist activists who have clashed on issues of anti-racist, anti-capitalist, LGBTQ organizing, and reproductive justice organizing. These schisms in the American feminist movement are long and deep. And similarly, if we're talking about the white-dominated secular feminist contingent, many of them have been largely ignorant of, if not resistant to, the culturally specific lived experiences and social histories of women of color. Case in point, a young atheist Latina feminist activist who worked with me in my Women's Leadership Project, Civic Engagement, and Feminist Humanist Mentoring Program in South LA had this to say about intersectionality and the divide within the secular movement and the feminist movement. Over the past several years, we've worked at schools where students who aren't considered gifted or college material weren't encouraged to prepare for college. For example, African American students are disproportionately shut out of college prep, advanced placement, and honors classes, and undocumented students are often told straight up by racist teachers that, quote, my taxes shouldn't pay for you to go to college. Black and Latino students are searched, profiled, criminalized, and pipelined into prisons. Girls of color are ritually silenced when it comes to speaking out about basic rights like freedom from sexual harassment or access to birth control. Most of our students come from highly religious backgrounds that discourage any form of questioning about gender roles. At 16 and 17, girls are already saddled with the double and triple burden of schoolwork, housework, caregiving, and childcare for younger siblings. Being involved in the Women's Leadership Project, they begin to see the sexism in these double standards, and the constant misogynist policing of their sexuality, and the racist bitch, hoe, mammy, maid roles that society stereotypes them into as girls of color. Hardly a week goes by when one of our girls isn't absent because she has to help with childcare or work to support her family. Hardly a quarter goes by when we don't hear a story about a pregnant sister who is keeping her baby because she can't, quote, kill God's creation. For our girls, abortion is freedom, and reproductive justice is life, period. So no trying to get 10 Commandments displays taken down or challenging prayer in school are not our priorities as atheists and freethinkers of color teaching in urban schools. And so I've asked the panelists to reflect on a question. Namely, what are some of the primary challenges feminists of color face in the white-dominated secular movement, and how does your coalition building work outside of the movement intersect with secular, humanist, and atheist issues? And Maggie, you can start.
Okay, I'll start first. Well, thank you again to Dr. Sakiba Hutchinson for the opportunity to speak here. I don't often get invited to speak on these particular topics because, as we all know, when we attend national secular conferences, these conversations don't quite often happen. So I'm often, asked to speak generally about church-state separation or the American Humanist Association. And so I'm pleased to speak about something that I think is personally important to me and I think personally important to the panelists here. I want to talk a little bit about my organizational perspective, having worked for the American Humanist Association for 10 years, I think that they're sort of intertwined in many ways. And I'll talk about two specific challenges for me that I think face feminists of color in the secular movement, and some ideas on how we can overcome them. So it almost goes without saying that it's very rare to be a Filipino atheist. There are 2.5 million Filipino Americans in the United States. We are the second largest Asian American group, and 65% are Catholic. But though Asian Americans are more likely than the general public to be unaffiliated with any religion, that's 25% actually identify as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. Among Filipinos, only 1% identify as atheist or agnostic, and only 8% identify as nothing in particular. And I think this is obvious to a lot of people. Being Filipino and Filipino culture and Catholicism are significantly linked. As immigrants, coming to the United States, religion was essentially your only community, and so this is how we were able to form alliances, but also survive in a new country. And though I was taught in the stereotypical Asian way of working hard and getting straight A's in school, I was also to understand my place as a woman. To work too hard could intimidate my future husband. And that working hard in school largely referred only to me and my 4 sisters and not my 2 brothers. My brother's got preferential treatment over all of us. He was able to go to friends' houses and go to sleepovers and stay out late and even date. We were not allowed to date because, as my father always said, boys can take care of themselves. So at an early age, I had already internalized that girls were fragile, girls were sensitive creatures that needed caring by fathers and husbands. And I think this upbringing has implications even today. I'm very lucky to, again, I've worked for the AHA as a fundraising director. It's hard to find fundraising directors in the nonprofit sector in general. So I've been very honored and lucky to have been sought out for a lot of top positions, CEO positions, executive director positions, development director positions, not just in the secular movement, but also in the larger progressive movement. And this is great. I'm pleased to be sought out for that. But the thought of me running an organization is inhibited by my religious upbringing and my cultural upbringing, that women can't be leaders, that they should be supporters, that they should be in the background supporting men. And I've internalized this thinking so much that I've actually said on record, regrettably, on podcasts and other types of areas where I've been interviewed, that it's my personal preference to be in the background. I just prefer it. It's my personality. It's better to be the campaign organizer rather than the person running for the Senate or for Congress. Because it's really important to remember that women in a lot of traditional religious societies have internalized this type of thinking. I'm not saying that that's the only reason. There is certainly sexism that's going on in the secular movement. There's discrimination that happens in the secular movement. But one challenge I feel is often this religious upbringing that is inhibiting women to support each other and also find the strength and the opportunity to take on these leadership positions. We have to remember that we can lead organizations and we can make a difference when we take these positions. If you look at the board of directors of most of the major secular organizations, and even sort of the smaller secular organizations like humanist and atheist local groups, we're largely underrepresented. Just looking at them. And this is something that we need to change. We need to be running for leadership positions because you have no idea how much change you can make if you serve on a board of directors. Incredible amount of change. In fact, the American Humanist Association just recently did a strategic plan making social justice one of our top priorities for the next 10 years. And we're actually hiring a social justice coordinator. In fact, Roy Speckhardt, the executive director, is reading resumes this weekend. So if you're looking for a job in social justice and want to come to Washington, D.C. and work for the American Humanist Association, I really encourage you to do that. But this is something that only happened recently. Of course, we should have been doing this a long time ago. But we're starting now, and we're making it a priority to make it happen. So I think that's one big challenge there regarding feminism and social justice. The other challenge I've experienced in battle is particularly battling this notion that humanist should replace the word feminist, and that being a humanist absolves a person from being sexist or racist. I know I don't have to say this to this group. Thank you for that. I say this to other people and they're like, what? First I want to make it very clear, in the feminist movement. So largely our battles are mostly online. Luckily, they're not really internally with members. Most of our members agree with us on this. But you know, men's rights activists and people who are trying to use the word humanism to replace feminism. They're saying it's a better word than feminism, and we do not agree with this. I want to go on record for that. And of course, being a humanist does not mean you are incapable of sexist or racist thoughts or actions. As Dr. Tony Penn has said, you can be logical and a person who operates on reason and still be racist, sexist, classist, female. And for me, this was made very clear just a couple of years ago. Many of you who follow the AHA may remember on Facebook, may remember a simple meme that we put up in November of 2014 after the murder of Michael Brown. And the meme said, "Humanism is about respect and appreciation of human rights for everyone. We will remember the lives of Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, and countless others, and will work toward a justice system that recognizes the humanity of all people. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Ferguson, hashtag Humanists Unite." Now it's worth noting that this meme got 5,000 shares and 12,000 likes, so we could safely assume that a large number of our community actually supported the statement and cared about the statement, and we're glad that we put it out. But they didn't read the comments, right? Yeah. I wish we didn't have to read comments, but we did. You know, comments calling Michael Brown a thug, that the evidence showed that he committed crimes, that we were getting involved in race where we shouldn't be, that we shouldn't have even put Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown together because they were totally separate situations. But, you know, for me, you know, perpetuating a race war, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the worst is that we should stick to church-state separation and atheism, right? And these are people who call themselves humanists. And some background about how the meme developed. So I'm, as I mentioned, I'm communications director for AHA, and so I largely, I give the okay for posts and memes that go up on behalf of AHA. But it's a collaborative effort. A lot of us on staff get together and we talk about these issues and we go, okay, how are we going to make a statement? And we have to be a little more careful about it because, you know, we have about over 500,000 followers now. And generally speaking, we try to not have as much negativity, you know, we try to reduce that as best as we can, you know, just being, you know, the head of organization, we try to minimize negativity as much as we possibly can. And around this time, people who were calling themselves humanists, again, were saying a lot of these ugly things, and then encouraging us to use the hashtag All Lives Matter. And right. And we had a debate about this at the AHA headquarters. We had to get together, and all of us on staff, and we talked about this. And there were a few options. We thought, well, let's just put All Lives Matter because, right, we're humanists. We care about everybody. We love everybody. Let's go with that. And then some people were saying, no, we should use Black Lives Matter. And then some people were saying, well, no, how do we do both? Let's put both Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter and make everybody happy, because that's what we do. And I didn't agree. I said I didn't agree. I think putting up All Lives Matter was a huge mistake, and we didn't do it. So we went with hashtag Black Lives Matter, Ferguson, and Humanists Unite. And we made up Humanists Unite because we knew that this would divide humanists. We knew that we were going to get these negative comments. We knew that people were going to say, you're getting involved in a race war where you shouldn't be. And we wanted to make it clear, we are united on this. And so this is where we stand. And so it was something that was really important. So I feel that those are kind of the two, you know, again, from my own personal perspective and having worked at AHA, being the biggest challenges that face the movement. Though humanism is a compassionate, reason-based philosophy, it's a sad truth to face that to some humanists or atheists, or free thinkers or rationalists, Black lives do not matter, that the goals of feminism do not matter, that the AHA should not get involved in anything other than the separation of religion and government. This applies to other secular organizations as well. And I'm here to say that those people are wrong. And the best way for us to overcome these challenges is to create opportunities for women of color and people of color to lead secular organizations and make social justice a priority, to dialogue with current secular leaders to make social justice a priority, and to fight against anyone who would attempt to hijack the word humanism to mean anything other than compassion, equality, and justice for all. Thank you very much.
All right, well, how does one follow that? Well, I actually see some similarities with your background as far as the immigrant thing goes. My family is originally from India, immigrants here, and nominally religious when they first came over here. Not very religious at all. And suddenly when I was 5, they freaked out. Because they would watch the evening sensationalist news, they would one of my mom's friends worked as an emergency room nurse and would tell horror stories of pregnant 13-year-olds. And so my parents completely, here's where intersectionality sometimes doesn't happen, where you have a family that's an immigrant family, but they don't understand these socioeconomic aspects of, the fears that they had about pregnant teenagers and heroin addicts. So, my parents went extremely religious, and my family's Muslim. So, normal Muslim, nominal Muslim is already so bad, and then you go further with it, and it gets even more ridiculous. And I remember as a kid being really into religion, being really into writing and things like that, and aspiring to be, a Muslim writer and speaker, and then I realized, oh, woman, that's not super allowed or permitted. I mean, there are a lot of Muslim female writers and activists and things like that, but, they're constrained by certain rules and norms and things like that. And so, I journeyed out of Islam, which is its own talk, and there's multiple versions of it online, so if you're curious, I won't get into it because then I'll just eat up all the time. But once I got out of Islam, I thought, oh, this itch I have to write and speak and be out there and talk about my story and talk about the complexities of it. Clearly the secular movement, not being religious, will let me. What reason do they have to not want me to do this thing? And then I found out that sexism was not limited to religious people. And it sounds hilarious right now, but 10 years ago when I first became an atheist, that didn't occur to me. It never occurred to me that, secular movements would have this ingrained sexism. And then I found out not only was it sexism based on secular reasons, it was based on what they thought were legitimate biological reasons. The BS evolutionary psychology just so stories, as Rebecca Watson calls it. She did talk at Skepticon about it, where they say, oh, girls like pink and boys like blue, and it's because of berry picking. They would just completely fabricate bad science, almost like, a more gendered version of eugenics in certain ways. And that's another thing, too, that I remember thinking about. I remember thinking that, as people who love science in this movement, with their I effing love science pages and their posts of pictures of galaxies and their obsessions with certain biologists with bad Twitters that I will name. You would think that they would care about We all had fun last week, I know. But, you would think that they would care about things like the history of eugenics. You think they would care about, the parts of science that have been used and manipulated for white supremacist reasons. But instead they just want to ignore it. I had someone, I remember at my first Skepticon, I was walking over for dinner, as you do, and this person that I just met was laughing and saying, oh, I know this black lady who's really skeptical of medicine, ha ha, why would she be skeptical of science? And I just looked at him like, where have you lived? What planet do you live on? And that's when you figure out really the realities are different in so many ways. A lot of these secular groups and things like that, people in it who don't have intersectional concerns, they think you can check part of your identities at the door. They think that you can leave your brownness and your feminist behind the door and you come in and you're just an atheist and you just care about church-state separation. That's the thing, right? That's the holy grail of activism, apparently. And everything else can just, screw itself. But that's where sort of I come in, where I don't officially work with any orgs, although I flirt with a lot of them. I do work for certain ones. But that's where I feel like my role comes in, and I basically try to get in there and get people to listen. And it's sometimes a thankless slog, and sometimes I wonder why I bother at all. But then you see changes actually happening. You see movements actually happening. But I think people are finally, to some extent, they'll not be too optimistic here. But I feel people are finally starting to understand that we can't leave parts of ourselves behind. That we are a whole people and we bring in everything. And every single thing that affects us affects other things. So, being a person of color is one thing, being a woman is one thing, being a woman of color is another thing. And then being an ex-Muslim is yet another thing. And that's kind of where I face some challenges in working with the secular movement, because everyone in the secular movement, you say the word ex-Muslim and suddenly they all are fawning over you. Oh, you're so brave. Oh, good job. A plus for deconverting. Okay. And then they don't want to believe me, though, when I tell them that my most credible threats of violence do not come from Muslims. They come from fellow atheists. Yeah. Someone in Yemen getting mad at me on Twitter and telling telling me that he's going to set me straight with his penis is one thing. But somebody in the United States who attends the same groups as me, who goes to the same atheist conferences as me, threatening me, that's scary. That actually is going to have an effect on me. And then, you know, they want to ignore certain parts of it. You know, they want to use Muslims as ex-Muslims as tokens. To say, look how much worse sexism is over here. We're so much better than those horrible brown men. And it's abysmal. And I think a lot of ex-Muslims, like when we first get on the scene, are excited by all the attention we get, and suddenly become disenchanted by it. Because we don't want to be their shield. We don't want to be what they use to show how great they are. Because, you know, you have a certain kind of sexism here and a certain kind of sexism here, but it's all sexism. And it is sort of racist the way some of them just assume the worst things about my family and about my background. You know, I have a spouse, he's estranged from his family, I am not estranged from my family. You know, it's entirely possible that, you know, people have a variety of experiences and things like that. So that's been a challenge for me, is just sort of trying to figure out my place, where, you know, I honestly speak about the problems with being an ex-Muslim, and I honestly speak about the struggles I've gone through, but at the same time, not doing it in such a way that I can get co-opted by white men who want to talk about how superior they are. And it's a really tough balance to walk, and I go back and forth on it, and I frame things certain ways, in certain contexts and not in other contexts. And I've become a little bit more careful about what I say and how I say it, so that's been a really big challenge. But, you know, hopefully, you know, a couple years in, I'll do even better with that. As far as coalition building, that's another thing. I realized that in some ways I have a lot more in common with progressive Muslims than certain atheists. And that was shocking to me, because when I was a Muslim, I thought progressive Muslims were a joke. I thought, oh, you're just ignoring half the Quran, haha, good luck with that. And then when I deconverted, I said, why don't these people just deconvert? Why don't they just leave religion like I did? Then I realized, you know, if anything, I should know how tough that is. And so I've started building more alliances with progressive Muslims, with feminist Muslims, with LGBT Muslims. And, you know, showing them that, you know, ex-Muslim does not have to be neocon. Ex-Muslim does not have to be racist shield for white men to talk about how superior they are. That ex-Muslim can just mean somebody who has left Islam, but wants to do their best to support the efforts of reforming from within. And so that's something I've really changed my stance on in the past couple of years. So I've been trying to reach out and build alliances with progressive Muslims. But you know, it's a tough challenge, because it's not like the atheist movement has done a lot for progressive Muslims. You know, when I say the word LGBT Muslim, everyone thinks it's hilarious to laugh and say, isn't that an oxymoron? You know, I can do a talk on it. I can talk about groups that are actually all about LGBT Muslims and progressiveness, and yet everyone just wants to make the joke about how that can't exist. And you know, at some point it just stops being funny. It starts being erasure. And so that's something I've been working on a great deal.
So I am co-founder of Secular Sisters. We are a completely grassroots organization, just really, just me and two other ladies just got together, and we decided that we wanted to form a group of Black women who were non-religious, skeptics, agnostic, atheists, just because we realized that most sister groups are faith-based. Everything that most Black women do is revolved around God, religion, and for those of us who aren't religious, it can sort of be it can become very isolating and very uncomfortable. So my own personal background, my parents are Baptist, they are from the South. They're not overly religious. I did grow up going to church, but it wasn't anything that was kind of browbeaten into me. So I think I came out atheist, ironically, when I moved to Houston to pursue my master's in social work. And so I joined the Houston Humanist And that was very eye-opening for me. For one, I kind of always felt like atheism was a white person thing, and it was something evil and something that had to do with devil worship and something I had nothing that I wanted to actually be involved with. But once I started going online and I joined this group and started talking to different people, and then and I ended up moving back to DC, and he put me in contact with Black atheists in DC, and that was kind of the catalyst for Sexual Sisters, because I met some people, some like-minded people, and it was just great. So from there, you know, it's like, oh, okay, so as a social worker, you know, we fight for social justice. So all of these things tie together. So it's something I've always been passionate about. So as far as some challenges, some unforeseen challenges, maybe they were always there and I wasn't privy to them. But I will say underrepresentation, of course. Black women, as far as I know, we still are the #1 religious group in America, so definitely underrepresentation. And where do we have these safe spaces where we can talk about being Black and being a feminist and combating sexism? Where does that happen? Because not, in general, when you're with, in a mixed group, you can't always have those conversations. So because there's always a man that said, well, not all men. Well, not all men do that. Well, okay. we're not really, okay, good for you. Some problematic behaviors that do occur with men. So, and then even with that, I know that with Sexual Sisters, we are strictly for Black women, and we do have allies, and not to say that we don't reach out to other women of color, we don't participate in other, you know, movements with other people, but we really specifically have a specific challenges that only we can kind of talk about, and when we get together, it's just a huge comfort level for people to express themselves. So, for example, I just want to talk about one time that me and another Sexual Sister member went to a CFI meeting, which is the Center for Inquiry. We were the only 2 Black women there. I think there might have been maybe an Indian couple, but it was we were at dinner and it was 10 other white people. And the organizer proceeded to engage in some conversation, and of course it led to, oh, you know, we never see Black women, we don't, you know, where are you? Yeah, you don't believe in God, wow, that's amazing. How does that happen? So, and then she went on to say that she had actually a Black friend, an older lady, who was, yeah, I know, it was just the most blatant cliche that you could ever imagine, and it was a little bit surreal, but it happened. And she was like, wow, she's just spicy, and she's just, just out. Yeah, she's just one of the most outspoken people that you could ever meet. And out of respect for this gathering, knowing me and how I can be, in that moment I didn't speak on it because it was frustrating, but I'm like, this is real life, this is what happens, and this is why you have to have these groups, this is why you have to have Sexual Sisters, because, of course, after the meeting, me and the other lady, we dissected that and talked about it, it's like, wow, this is crazy, so I won't ever be going back to any of those meetings, and and it's unfortunate, because I'm sure that they probably do need somebody to kind of come in and be that person who is talking about those things, and CFI does have a group that is strictly for women, but again, there's a separation between white feminism and Black feminism. Those two things don't necessarily go together, they don't correlate. There's a huge gap in what happens in those meetings, so that's just one example of a challenge. And just, like the sense of isolation when, as far as so if you call yourself a feminist and you go into these spaces and they're predominantly white, I think that shuts down a lot of Black women from wanting to even wanting to voice their concerns or what they're talking about or what they're there for. It's intimidating. I know that even when I joined the Humanist meetup group, there might have been like 4 or 5 Black people, but everybody was white. And so I just have a problem with that. I don't really like going into situations where I'm just like one or the only other Black person. And then for Day of Solidarity was really great because then it was like, oh, well, here are all the Black people that are in this community. And it's interesting even then, because then it's like, oh, well, that's racist, you all want your own day. So, so just a lot of, and that's just the racial side. That's not even the, the gender equality and all those other things that come along with being in this community that are challenging. So I guess on one last point, as far as like some challenges, is also looking at the leaders in the white movement, such as Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. I have no idea. I mean, I'm still new to this, so yeah, so kind of bear with me too, because I'm still kind of new to atheism and feminism for the most part. You know, in my heart, I was always a feminist. But looking and kind of listening to the speeches and kind of following them and getting and understanding, oh, so they're like a big deal in the atheist community, but they're two white men, and I don't know if they ever talk about issues with people of color or racism. I don't think they do. And right, yeah. So that's another challenge, I think, as far as being a woman of color, feminist in this movement. Looking to see where are your leaders, who are the people that you can follow, like, you know, who can I relate to? Because this is not it, really. You know, I learned some awesome things about atheism, but how does that connect to me as a Black woman? It wasn't there. So our collaboration outside of the intersection of collaboration, for one, so Secular Sisters have like a really great community service project that we did last year, where we were able to raise thousands of dollars in products and money for the LGBTQ youth at the Wanda Austin House, which is a nonprofit for those youth who have essentially been either they're homeless or they've been abandoned and and they just need a place to live, and there's all types of programs and things that help them. So the money that we raised was for feminine hygiene products. As you all know, they're very costly and expensive. So I think as far as like how the intersection happens is that us being atheist or humanist or whatever, we don't have any kind of moral hang-up about working with people in marginalized situations and people in that community. It doesn't hinder us from helping them or being allies and them being allies with us. So that was one. And then Secular Sisters also was part of a protest for hashtag Say Her Name, which so as you know, yes, we talk about Trayvon Martin and all the Black men who have been victims of police brutality, but what about the Black girls? Because there are a number of them. So going out and speaking and protesting and meeting people who are, of course, outside of, you know, they may not necessarily be atheists or humanists or whatever, but still going out and meeting with those people and rallying with them and protesting, I think, was part of our collaboration going. And one other situation that I kind of just want to address before I speak is that I went to a state hall meeting for Natasha McKenna, and she is a young lady. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she is actually where I'm from, which is, well, I live in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a couple minutes outside of DC, but she is a young lady who was killed, when she was tasered to death under police. Well, she was arrested and she was taken into custody, under police custody. She was tasered like 500 times. She was, and they did it while she was naked. It was just like a really, really horrific situation. And even now, you know, people are still fighting for her to have justice because nobody was held accountable for what happened to her. Not the police officers, not anybody who was in that situation. And I bring that up to say, as far as like some of the challenges of being a Black woman, number one, because like I said, we're still fighting for justice for her. Number two, when I went to that telephone meeting, I walked in and it was a bunch of white people. So, which is fine, but I wasn't under the impression that that was going to be the people who were facilitating the meeting, because I found out about it through Black Lives Matter. And I think and it was facilitated by a group called Surge. And they are white allies who work a great deal with Black Lives Matter. The only concern that I had during that entire time was when we were talking about how can we get the word about Natasha McKinnis, that one of the ladies said that, well, maybe we need to humanize her, talk about some of the things that she likes and dislikes, and what she liked when she was alive. And there was a lady there who was actually friends of the family of Natasha McKinnis. She said, we shouldn't have to do that. Why is it that you see, is it because she's black and you don't associate her being human or being a real person because she is black? So those kind of conversations are also things that, you know, that needs to be unpacked, and we need to kind of talk about it, because you shouldn't have to, you know, humanize a human. So, okay. So let's take it.
I'm not going to belabor the point. My first thought here was some of the primary challenges faced by feminists of color in white-dominated secular movement are erasure, colorblindness, spokesperson, coaching, and tone policing. We've heard many of those things, so I definitely won't belabor those. But some of the things I did want to expound on, and I'm Deanna, so back up. I deconverted about 4.5 years ago. I was raised, it's a funny story, and I won't go too deep into it right this second, but from the time I was small until about 11 years old, we didn't go to church on Sundays, we went to the beach. So we would, my mom would pack with Coke and beer and whatever. We'd drive down to Freeport and we'd stay at the beach all day long on Sundays. When I was about 11, she was, became born again. Long story short, and I was kind of the lead in that actually in the family. Because on the other side of my family, my dad's side was kind of religious, and so I was always wondering, like, I don't want to go to church. And so when she started to go to church, I was like, oh, I guess this is the thing to do. So, we went there. So I was raised pretty much from 11 to 18 Baptist. I stayed out of church during college, went to the University of Houston, and probably should have stayed out there. And I had a professor in the human situation that just flat out asked me, why do you believe this? I don't know. But I was 18, so kind of held on to it for a little while. And knew I didn't want to go back to the old, Baptist church. So when I graduated, I went to a prosperity church, and I was there for about 10 years. Then I was married with kids. We wanted to get a little more personal, so we went to a small church with a lady pastor, not denominational, but I call it a cult. I mean, she was out there. We couldn't smoke, we couldn't drink, we couldn't curse, we couldn't watch movies, we couldn't, and everything, every part of our life had to revolve around that church and the people in that church. So, left an abusive marriage and an abusive church at the same time, and pretty much this is kind of how I started my deconversion. So, with that being said, we've definitely talked about so far, women of color being unheard, a lot of white atheists, they're above racism and above sexism, the rational male, they're better than that. The color blindness being an extension of the erasure. So, going past that, on the other side of the coin, and Ayana touched on it, I believe it is actually, Ayana touched on it, being the token. So, the other point of that is you don't want to, there's a danger in becoming the spokesperson / token of the person of color in a group or organization. And while it is worthwhile to speak up and bring our specific issues to light, like what we're doing now, like I try to do, I'm currently on board with Feminists of Houston, and I do try to speak up and bring those issues to light. We have to be careful not to become the black friend, that pats our white counterparts on the head and tells them the best allies ever. I had a post, and the people that I work with at HOH Surgery, and I had a post, and I said, I don't give out cookies. I don't give out cookies. And one of our customers said, are you real cookies? You have to be authentic. You have to be able to bring those issues to light. Know that we're working together. We appreciate that, but sometimes we just need And also, we're not a monolith, so it should be understood that having a variety of feminist voices of color is always preferable to just the one. Finally, well, not finally, but tone policing is something that we haven't really touched on here. But it's an ever-present danger for feminists of color, especially Black women. Many times, even within groups of like ethnicity, Black women who speak up are portrayed as angry or hostile, and attempts are made to silence us if we fall out of step with the group in any way. I'm actually experiencing that right as we speak. Some of you have read my latest blog. It's been an interesting day already, but you know, it can be a challenge to continue to stand up for yourself and stand up for other women when it feels as though you're being pushed on all sides, and that's within the group and without the group. So, you know, and that's from people who may or may not have ulterior motives on your best interest at heart. And finally, a challenge that has slightly been touched on, I'd like to explore more, is there is a targeting sometimes of women within the secular movement. And being a secular woman of color and a feminist, and, you know, all these extra things that are on top, a lot of times we can be targeted for that. Since the blog post that I mentioned, I've had women email me or message me on Facebook or, you know, kind of reach out and say, first of all, I'm not surprised, which was interesting because I was. You know, I've only been in this movement for about 2 years, so I have, you know, just as background for those who haven't read it, basically I had safety issues about someone who was coming into the group. I feel as though those issues were dismissed and not taken seriously. And when I brought that to light, it was, I don't think it was handled very nicely or very professionally, even to the point of, you know, there are 2 women in the room and the leader saying, hey, what do you think about this? You're a woman. Would you be scared too? Don't do that. Ever do that. If a woman tells you that she's being targeted, if you see that a woman is being targeted, and in this instance there was a whole long list of emails that knew what was being targeted. But if you see those things, we need to speak up and we need to protect those people. And that's one of the things that I found very disappointing, and especially when other women came to me and said, this has happened to me and this other thing has happened to me. There is a targeting in this area that mirrors the community at large. You know, if it happens in the bigger world, it happens in the secular world too. And we need to stop pretending as though we're better than all of that and we're above all of that. So that's, you know, one of the main things I wanted to get across today is to look out for each other, protect these women, all of us. Because, and even romantically, I've heard, you know, women have come to me and said, you know, I spurned this guy's advances and now all of a sudden he's a sociopath. So we've got to look out for each other in that regard. And then as far as coalition building work outside of the movement, I am warming up to the idea of working with other groups such as progressive Christians, and also I've been invited to participate with other Greek organizations. I did pledge a sorority in college, so there's a group called Black Greeks Speak here in the Houston area. I believe it's national. I'm warming up to those ideas, but I must admit I'm still very hesitant because my belief is that religion is inherently misogynistic. It just, you know, you read the Bible, it tells them to sit down, shut up, get beat, deal with it, take care of it, you know, that kind of thing. So my personal focus over the last couple of years has been to bring social justice issues to the secular community and help us move forward in that area. Primarily because humanism should be aligned with social justice by definition. You know, we are all we have, as far as I'm concerned. There's no hope coming from on high, you know, so we have to take care of each other. And as an example, many secularists in the Houston area fought for the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. Some of you may be familiar with that. It did ultimately fail. And it failed and was succeeded by religious leaders who were stuck in fear about transgender Houstonians going to restrooms. Very, very stupid reason. And interestingly enough, when I was doing, you know, research on this and outreach and things like that, 54, 56% of the discrimination in the Houston area was racial. And it was Black pastors who were against this ordinance because behind them were white conservative pastors who told them to tell their congregations that it's, you know, an LGBT thing and we're going to have transgender people in the restroom stalking you. So that was something that touched all of us. It touched all of us religiously, racially, gender, LGBTQ status, in a lot of different ways. So we had to coalition build with that. And hopefully it will come back up and hopefully it will, you know, go through in some form or another. But what I did in bringing that issue to the Black secular community, I set up a panel that included an LGBT activist, an atheist LGBTQ activist, a Christian transgender activist, and a Christian attorney who were all in favor of the ordinance but were able to speak to different parts of it. And I thought it was really important to have that mixture there to show that we were kind of, you know, we are all in this together. The intersection of civil rights, race, and religion was clear, even our beliefs differ substantially. And also, as a former educator and mother, I'm very passionate. I'm still a mother, I'm a former educator. I'm really passionate about the school prison pipeline. The disproportionate discipline meted out to students of color, primarily Black and Latina, is a major problem across the country. And in trying to build a coalition against such inequality, specifically here in Texas, I gave a talk to the Humanist meeting about the subject. Many of them had no idea what was going on in Texas alone, much less the nation. But education inequality is most definitely a secular, atheist, and humanist issue. As students shuffle into the prison pipeline, can't advance society, often can't reason their way into atheism, and it's our duty to help them to, you know, their full potential as citizens. So, as I stated, these issues really are intersectional, and we really need to do a better job as secularists to reach out to these social justice organizations and these social justice issues and become another voice that's calling for change.
And then it's important to note, with regard to your point, that Texas and California are neck and neck when it comes to being the most prolific jailers in the nation. And particularly we're talking about suspension, expulsion, and push-out, not drop-out, but push-out of children of color, particularly African-American youth. That there's one really egregious statistic from Austin where 30% of suspensions were African-American children, and African-American children were like 8 to 9%, you know, of the Austin public school system. So these are the kinds of, gross disproportionalities that we're confronted with in attempting to address. A couple of points, and then I definitely want to open it up for questions. We've got about a half hour. A lot of us would love if someone would patent an invention where we could have a force field, and we go to these hyper-white, hyper-segregated, secular atheist humanist compounds, and we get some clueless white person who drifts into our orbit and suddenly repel that individual. Because this is our ad nauseum, ad infinitum experience, being in this rarefied world. The nuns. We've heard a lot about the meteoric rise of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, that there's a secular wave that is basically affecting a paradigm shift in the United States. Millennials, are a big chunk of these nuns who don't necessarily subscribe to organized religion, may be spiritual, maybe in the humanist column, maybe in the atheist column. It's an amalgam. When we look at our communities, we're not seeing this meteoric rise of the nuns, particularly among African American and Latina women. So I want to pose a question about that because, Deanna, you talked about your intersectional work, interfaith work, which is really important, and the fact that there is such grave systemic violence within Black churches, Catholic Latino churches, Pentecostal Latino churches, and the list goes on. But still, we have a lot of women of color, progressive, feminist, womanist, radical, who are invested in their church communities, invested in religious organizing, see that as really being the only meaningful leverage when it comes to all of the intersectional community organizing issues that we're talking about. How do we have dialogue across the lines with our sisters, in other words? Because we've got a lot of blowback about that. And how do we coalition build specifically with our religious women of color sisters and counterparts?
Well, I can say no. I've not really forged a lot of ties with progressive faith organizations, as I mentioned, because I view it as inherently misogynistic. I know my experiences personally of violence and visibility and usage in the meaning of women are used in the Black church, especially to do all the work while men are in leadership positions. My experiences in that have really turned me off. I use the term post-traumatic church syndrome. I seriously avoid going into churches. The last time I was in church was my stepfather's funeral, and I almost lost it then. Not because I wasn't happy that he was gone, but he had gone through a long battle with cancer, so I was okay with that. He wasn't suffering anymore, but it was the blatant, just the church and the pastor and the damnation and hellfire and everything. So that being said, when I'm challenged by religious women in my family, I remind them of the biblically sanctioned violence that's in the Bible. And I think more than that, so we can question them, we can say, how can they speak up for themselves if the Bible really tells them not to speak, blah, blah, blah. So, personally I am more along the lines of organizing second women of color, because I think there's a lot of us that just don't join organizations for the reasons we already mentioned. But I do think it's important to, and I'm beginning to learn this and be better about this, it's important to find common ground where you can do work, where you can actually get things done. So my biggest kind of action is to say, look, I don't believe what you believe, but I believe that we shouldn't be shuffled in the school to prison pipeline. I believe that girls shouldn't be named out of the chair in their high schools. We believe this. So if, and like I said, I'm a work in progress on this one. If we can work together for those goals, then I also think that I can be an example. And actually, I think Greta was in here the other night, she mentioned one of the best ways we can kind of evangelize money-evangelism to our friends and family is by being an example. Guess what? I'm an atheist. Really? You can do that? Yes, we can do it. And my life hasn't fallen apart in the last 4.5 years. I'm still happy. Kids are still out. We're great. And I think as more that we work together on those common goals, and they can see that it is possible. Because a lot of times I'm the only atheist many people in my family know. So it's more, the more that we find a common ground, we see that it's possible, they can kind of move towards that too. But I did notice that, and I've noticed this recently, a lot of people are in church, they don't really believe it. They just feel like that's the only place they can get those services. Right. So if we can provide those services and provide that conversation and do the work, actually do the work, then there is an alternative and they can come out of that feeling.
Yeah, I think to add to that too, I think it's natural for us atheists to emphasize, the facts, the science, the things that challenge religion, and think that this is going to convince women of color to come to our movement. I know. Yes. And we have to challenge that. That kind of thinking is not going to work. I think one of the reasons why I started to question Catholicism was because I noticed that the Bible says that you can't use birth control, and then I was seeing a lot of people, including my mother, using birth control, and already that there's something that doesn't make sense there, and so that already started me questioning. And one of the things I would have loved to mention too, when I was speaking earlier, at the time, and I'll do so now, is that to attract more people, you have to obviously start from where they are and talk about the problems they're facing. The biggest thing that faces a lot of Filipino poor working class women is access to birth control. Obviously, that is the biggest thing. I'm one of 7 kids. My parents use birth control for a really long time. I love myself, but Sam does a lot of kids. I really don't encourage that. But access, you know, and I'm just going to read this piece because CNN did an interview with a 52-year-old Filipino woman named Cecilia Lopez, who never finished school, lives in poverty, and has 12 children. And she was quoted as saying, "If I knew back then about the choices in family planning, I would have been able to control having children. If it were up to me, I wouldn't want to have so many." And when she did hear about the birth control pill from her neighbors, she said, "I couldn't afford it. Instead of spending money on birth control, I use it to buy food." You know, so this is what we face. I mean, so we think about, okay, yes, humanists and atheists, we fight for reproductive justice, we fight for reproductive freedom, we fight for the right for abortion, and that's good. We should keep doing that. But we have to remember that a lot of this is not getting access to poor women and working class women. We need to be doing more. We need to be making birth control free for absolutely everybody, and accessible to everybody too. And that's something that I feel, again, a lot of white secular men in the movement just don't understand.
Yeah, they think because Roe v. Wade is not overturned, everything is fine. Yeah. You know, everything is standing, even though we know it's not true. And actually, to return to the Condon Brown thing, I mean, I struggled with a lot of the same things where you know, part of the reason why I left Islam was the misogyny. And so the idea of working with people who believed in this misogynistic thing was just abhorrent to me. But, you know, over time I've evolved in some ways, you know, on this. And I think a lot of what sort of made me come back and be more open to working with progressive Muslims was really realizing the fact that a lot of society's anxieties about class, race, sexuality, gender, you name it, they're often exorcised on the backs of women of color. You know, the bodies of women of color are always a battleground for these things. It's always this visual representation. And as far as being a Muslim and an ex-Muslim, that sort of really comes to play because, you know, when white men want to be all superior about how great they are, they don't talk about, oh, Islam is discriminatory towards women. They just point at women in hijab. You know, whatever visual, obvious representation they can find, that's what they're pointing at. And, you know, they'll say things like, oh, hijab should be banned, and no one would ever actually choose to wear hijab. They're not really concerned with the choices that women make. They're concerned with this sort of visual thing that they think is weird or out there. And I realized that my having worn hijab and not wearing hijab now, you know, again, it's one of those things where it's used as a shield or a token sort of thing. And so realizing that we need to take this focus away from dealing with people's anxieties on the backs and on the bodies of women of color and talking more about actual progress in society and building a world where, you know, women actually are allowed to make choices about their appearance. That's part of what tipped me as far as, you know, not being so uncomfortable about working with Muslims. Because, you know, whether you wear hijab or don't wear hijab, if people perceive you as a Muslim, you're going to get some crap for it. You know, to this day, people will ask me, is your family Muslim or American? Which, you know, is a problem. It's a problem on a bunch of levels. But, and you know, that's another thing I get pushed back a lot from atheists. They say, what do you mean Islam's not a race? Well, it isn't, but it's a racialized issue. Well, what does that mean? I said, what that means is when I walk on the street, people say, effing Arab, go home, you terrorist. Because I look Muslim. Whether, you know, I've been an atheist for 10 years. I've been about as godless as they come. You know, if you want credentials for not being Muslim anymore, I got them by foot. But that doesn't matter when you're dealing with these bigots. And so that's very important, I think, to really push back on and say, no, Islam and hatred of Muslims is a racialized issue, even if Islam's a religion, not a race.
Oh, I can chime in on that. We haven't, census hasn't gotten there yet. So to be honest, I can't remember the last time I associated with anybody in the church at all. My mother still goes to church. My father does not go to church, neither does my brother. And so because my dad was in the military, it's just the four of us, so it's always just been the four of us. My extended family is all in South Carolina, and of course they're all religious. So I don't know, I guess that's something that we need to explore as a group and see how, you know, we can benefit from that. I don't know, it's interesting.
So I'm going to open it for questions now. We have about 18 minutes. Thoughts, well, let's sort of limit the thoughts and the whole report, but mostly questions.
of people of color. And I don't think that's the answer, but society dehumanizes people of color, and that's why this woman was criminalized for miscarrying, because they have all of these scripts that they don't socialize in that area. And atheists should know this too, because atheists get dehumanized. They're babies. They're wicked. They have no moral compass. And what's the answer to that? How do we get people to see people as people and deserving of the same justice as everybody else?
Well, anytime somebody comes up to me and says, you know, oh, I have a Filipino friend, I say, oh, I've got a white friend. I know that's passive aggressive, but to get more into that, I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, we need to convince the people who are in leadership positions right now in the national secular organizations to make this a priority, and to keep saying it until it's a priority. To keep saying it, and you know, there is a point where it's you know, it takes a while. They get defensive at first. They ignore it at first. Then they get defensive, like, oh, here's all the things that we are doing, actually, and it's not the things that you're supposed to be doing. But there will be a point where it breaks through, and I still think that even when it breaks through, there's still a lot of work to do. We're going to find all kinds of other communities that are going to come out and say we need to do more, and that's okay too. But we just need to put the pressure on leadership right now.
To your point, I wrote down a thought and I kind of like put it in a book somewhere. I love it. I know that I love it. And that probably sounds crazy, but whatever. It says, sometimes I feel the most liberatory form of feminist expression is where feminists of color, for a feminist of color, is simply existing unapologetically. And that, you know, to your question, we have to exist, we have to show that we exist. And I know we shouldn't have to. We definitely shouldn't have to, but we have to be seen. And we have to be seen authentically, unapologetically. This is who I am, this is what's important to me, and if it's not important to you too, then I need to go find people that it's important to as well. And I think the more that we do that, and the more that we, you know, show up and speak up and say, you know, deal with it, then people are either going to have to deal with it or they'll move on somewhere else or they're out of our way.
I think a big part of it is de facto versus de jure, especially with reproductive rights. People think that because the law still allows for birth control, abortion, whatever, then everything must be fine. Yeah. But I think they're forgetting, or they don't understand that this is an access issue as well. That this is an economic and racial often access issue. And so that's something I try to emphasize, you know, when they want to say, oh, you know, what's the big deal? You know, it's still legal. I said, well, you know, if you have to drive 300 miles to get a pack of pills that you have to pay, you know, how much money for, and if you do the math on that, that's not feasible for most people. And that's something that I didn't even realize, having been spoiled living in California. You know, I went in there at 18, they gave me the blue card, I got my free pills from Planned Parenthood, blah, yeah, it was fine. So I remember thinking, why does anybody in America get pregnant? And then I realized, oh, there's 3 Planned Parenthoods in a 20-mile radius for me. And that's just not true for most people. So, exactly. Pushing the understanding of access issues, I think, is utmost in getting them to understand what the problem is.
We talk about Planned Parenthood. And so that's a whole other issue too, as far as like, so I guess recently people have been talking about Margaret Sanger and how Planned Parenthood was, she started as a right, to wipe out black people, right? Yeah, so that's a rumor. So that's something.
It's sort of an exaggeration.
Right, so that was an interesting dynamic as far as, because I've always loved Planned Parenthood. Like, I've always been a huge advocate for Planned Parenthood, but then as a black feminist, and then being something about Margaret Sanger seems a little bit like it was contradictory and conflicting. Like, how could I support Planned Parenthood when it was based on some woman who tried to wipe out a whole black race or whatever? I don't know, but when we speak of reproductive rights and how do we push and just make ourselves known and make sure that that we have a voice. I mean, like everybody else has kind of said, you know, to just, kind of be in your face and maybe some more in your face activism. Maybe we need to go a little bit harder in what we're doing. I mean, you have people who can stand outside Planned Parenthood with their little Christ signs, whatever they do out there. But you don't have atheists, standing outside their kids being like, okay, like, this is a safe space. These people are allowed to walk through. So I don't know. So maybe those are some things that we can, talk about and plan.
To be fair, though, there's at least one person here who does clinic escorting that I know of. So there are some of you.
I've done it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I didn't escort no one. I actually challenged the person and told him that he was a liar. Because he had a thing that said, pray for abortion to stop. And I said, any God that needs to be prayed to and begged to do something that he feels and you feel is ethical is not an ethical God. He felt shameful.
So,
just
what is the
I'm a member of Planned Parenthood. I have been for a number of years. I've heard this Margaret Sanger stuff for a while, and I had a big come up and tell me about it. Well, I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of the founders of this country were racist too.
And that's revisionist history. I mean, the issue is that there were so many African American activists and leaders who were supportive of the origins of Planned Parenthood, precisely because it was an economic justice issue. It was an issue of trying to redress hyper-segregation and the violence that's inflicted upon the bodies of black women when they do not have equitable access to reproductive care and birth control. Another thing that needs to be foregrounded is that black women again have been at the forefront of reproductive justice activism, pushing back against hyper-religious evangelical propaganda that has been dumped into our community, basically saying that abortion is genocide. So we've had organizations from Georgia, like Sister Song, that some of you may be familiar with, Black Women for Wellness, from California, that have stood up and said that this is, again, toxic, misogynist bullshit that we're not going to allow in our communities. So that's something that we need to be aware of, that there's a long trajectory of black women's, womanist, and feminist activism around reproductive justice. And if the white atheists and the white humanists don't get it, as Deanna said, we're out of here. We're founding our own organizations and institutions. And that's why we're having SSJ this weekend. A couple more questions, yes.
Thank you very much. Speaking to the idea that we needed to find leaders that were going to be unapologetic and supportive, it was more than a couple of years ago now that I was on stage, and I think Tina was in the room, when I said that according to the one and only definition the word feminism ever had, it means anyone who supports the idea that women should have social, political, and economic equality with men. That is the only definition, and people will argue that there are other definitions, or that there's some strange faction of grad femmes out there somewhere that are giving others gift for that name, but they can never name them. So I said, in addition to this definition, obviously then one who does not believe that women should have equal status, well, that's the definition of sexism. So by definition, then, you're either a sexist or you're a feminist. And because I said that, I have endured 2 years' worth of continuous, voluminous hate mail from within the atheist community. The highest grossing atheists on YouTube are all the anti-feminists. They have more subscriptions than everybody else. Richard Dawkins, which you mentioned before, just barred from a conference because he shared a video that was openly misogynistic. So how do you speak to them? I'm going to get hell when people find out I went to a social justice conference, because I get you SJW asshole constantly, every day, every video I ever post, people want to vote. It doesn't matter what the subject is. People want to start that argument. So I'll get volumes more hate mail when I come back from this.
And your question is? We got 7 minutes. Yes.
I didn't mean to take up all your time, but how do you speak to that when you talk about getting leaders that are going to be supported?
Well, we need to stop for inviting Richard Dawkins to conferences. I'm also saying that he's not representative of the secular movement. On top of that,
exactly.
I mean, it's a very simple answer, but I mean, what NCESS did was, I thought was very bold. I mean, I'm working for an organization you know, it's tough to make calls like that, you know, because you know that a lot of people still like Richard Dawkins. They, you know, he really helped a lot of people, you know, become atheists and really formulate this thing. But you have to be clear. I mean, do you stand for feminism or not? And if you fight it, you're not speaking for feminism.
So a caveat to that is that some of you may be aware of the supergroup merger that's occurred between Richard Dawkins Foundation and CFI. You know, which CFI is arguably one of the most influential secular humanist, nominal secular humanist organizations in the world. You have this issue of him, again, as this, you know, white supremacist dude, bro, you know, spewing, you know, xenophobia and Islamophobia ad nauseum figurehead, and then we have him as a policymaker for this supergroup. So that's a dilemma.
Can any of you address, like, online harassment? I feel like that's really important before the session ends. And I really want to hear, the reason why I don't have an online presence is because I could never handle that. So when I hear about these rape threats, death threats, what do you think, first of all, what do you think we can do to help you? And one resource that just launched is Heart Mob. You should check that out if you haven't heard of it. And the second is, what do you think is going on in their psyche when they're threatening you with rape and death? Like, I just can't, I couldn't even imagine being that hateful toward, like, Donald Trump. I just don't understand their psyche. If you have, like, an opinion on that or, like, some thoughts on that.
Well, I could start with that. Because I was originally a writer at Skeptic, and I joined on the heels of the so-called elevator gate, which I like to call Dear Muslimah, because that was really the problem there. But I think a lot of what's going on is similar to street harassment. They're putting you in your place. They see you as an uppity woman, a mouthy bitch, and they want to tell you where you actually belong, which is, you know, I'm gonna get a little graphic here, but you know, like sucking their cock, basically. They're saying shut your mouth, or open your mouth, but don't talk. Because that's what you're good for, that's what you exist for. They're trying to sort of posture in this very this way that is part of toxic masculinity. It's essentially saying this is where you belong. And I would say even the women who, there's very few women who do this, as far as, you know, that kind of level of hatred. But they're also mimicking toxic masculinity when they do it. And actually Lindy West, who is an internet feminist, she actually, well, more than just an internet feminist, she's a comedian, she's great, but she did a segment for This American Life about her worst troll, and how she basically got him to change his mind and stop being so terrible. But he claimed, and I'm not sure if this is true for all trolls, but he claimed that at the time of his life, he hated himself, and he saw this confident, you know, woman who was unapologetic and feminist and fat and didn't care, and he just wanted to knock her down a bit. He didn't want her to be so happy and confident, things like that. I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that's what's going through their heads. They're, in some way, either they have their own, you know, insecurities that they're trying to knock people down because of that, or they just don't like the fact that people who are traditionally oppressed seem to be doing better than they are. And one thing that anyone can do to help is, honestly, if someone tries the denialism tactic, oh, it's not that big of a deal, oh, you know, please talk to them. Because those of us who actually are the target of it, we get tired eventually of constantly having to justify our reality. So, you know, there are tons of blog posts, articles, you name it, with statistics, with facts, with anecdotes, you name it. You know, have a folder in your bookmarks of proof that harassment is real. I have one. And when someone tries to mess with me or say it's not true, I can send them a giant list and say, all right, refute every single link. Just try it. You know, it's the reality. And the other thing, too, is to, I guess, take some of the heat off that way. But also just, you know, be aware. Be aware of it. And people make a big show of being shocked by it, but that, I think, doesn't necessarily help. Because it's not shocking for me. You know, I'm going to get some whiny, horrible thing. And also not necessarily, this is one thing that I see a lot, I'm trying not to take up all the time, but this is one thing I see a lot in the secular atheist movement, where people who block and are very careful and filtered with how they participate online are vilified and demonized. Oh, you're just living in an echo chamber. Oh, you're just shutting out dissent.
not realizing that, okay, maybe a few good faith people were blocked or knocked out of the discussion unfairly, but the fact is for every one of those, there's 100 who aren't in good faith. And that we have to do self-care and be careful to not exhaust ourselves on these pieces of crap who want to harass us. So yeah, defend people who block, defend people who take care of themselves, rather than go with this whole party line of, oh, they're just against free speech or they just want to live in an echo chamber.
We got time for one more.
Harrison? I'm sorry.
One more question.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Yes,
No, I'm a man, you speak.
That is actually somewhat related to my question. So I have recently joined CFI in Austin, and I started a social justice spin-off group trying to do social equity. Now, I have been upset since the get-go that it was all males in CFI, and my question is, at what point do we stop having spin-off groups? If people show up at CFI and it's not diverse, I have not been happy because it's not diverse either, and I want the group to be doing the equity issues that are affecting people of color, but I am not a representative of color, and I'm actually not a leader. To your point, I'm in a supporter type role, and yet I find myself that there is no group for people of color in Austin who are feminists. At what point do we stop spinning off and saying you have to be humanist, you have to be black, you have to be this, you have to be that, in order to have a group and have leaders and feel comfortable and all of that? How could I make a group that's going to be comfortable for people of color, that they'll participate in? How would I recruit people for this group? Because this is the group that I want to help, and I don't know how to do that.
No, I'll speak to that, and I'll just say what I have. If any of you have read my long piece on I did a post about white allies. And in that post, so 1 through 10 or what have you, but one of the main things was we can and we will speak for ourselves. I don't personally, we're not alone, but I don't personally need a white savior to come in and say, how can I fix this for you? In collaboration, sure. And I'm not saying don't be an ally, I'm not saying don't help. But understand that these are issues a lot of times that, I'll be 40 this year. I've dealt with these issues for nearly 40 years. I can really, really explain them to you if you need me to. That's necessary. But if I were to walk into a room and it's, the social justice room where it's the, whatever room, and all I see is white faces, I'm going to wonder where you're getting your information from. Just because, of course, you can get it online, you can do things like that, but all that to say that if that's something that you really want to do, and I applaud that, I appreciate that, you've got to find actual people of color, actual feminists of color, actual, people who have gone through it, who know about it, who have, lived and studied it their whole lives. You've got to find those people and say, look, this is what we want to do, we want to help, how can we help? Because I can't imagine just a room of people that have no idea what they're talking about being effective. And that's just me.
I think that's kind of the question, though, is how do we find those people?
You come here.
Right,
yeah. Well, right, to speak to that, kind of, you need to find someone who wants to do both, because I can go into a CFI meeting and say I want to be the wherever person, diverse person, I don't know, but I'm still going to have secular sisters. Like, this is, it's still going to be both. I don't know, but there's just, I guess it's just not convenient for us. Enough for us to go on. And there's more, I'm not saying it's easy, but there's definitely more of us that are out because we don't see each other. Right. When I was first going through deconversion, I was online and I was Googling black atheists. I didn't know that what I'm going through, what I'm thinking about, that other people who look like me had experienced. So we're out there, we're there.
you might have to dig a little deep, you might have to come to conferences like this, you might, especially if you're in a metropolitan city like Houston, you know, look at those organizations, look and talk to people, you know, and definitely nothing is going to be easy, but you've got to have that representation there.
And also make it appealing. Unfortunately, a lot of these groups is very much a free speech, Wild West, everything goes environment. And when you have an environment where harassment is tolerated as free speech, guess where you're going to drive out? So it's a free and safe space for a harasser, but not for anybody who might be harassed. So you have to sort of make, and it sounds obvious, but you have to make those things explicit. You have to explicitly say, you know, we have policies for this. We will deal with these things if they come up, rather than just assume everybody's nice. Because the same person who will be nice to you as a white person or a man or both won't necessarily be as nice to the woman of color.
Right.
Even though you think he's the nicest guy on the planet. I may be better about this one.
One final.
I was going to say that briefly, that's the issue about using the term people of color, because people of color tend to eliminate or cause erasure towards women, and, well, in this case, we're talking about women. Eliminate people who are not of African descent, they're basically not black or brown. And what happens is you see women who are trying to speak out about their issues, but they can't unpack and peel the onion back because we're clumping everything together. And I think that's kind of problematic. So when we have to separate ourselves and have Houston Black Non-Believers or have these different organizations, it's because we constantly have the front stage, and also we don't want to be a textbook about our pain. You know, if you want to know something, sometimes we just feel like you need to Google it. That's how we feel, and that's just the honest take on it.
Good work. We're about self-determination. And just to get back to AJ's point, Iana's point about the vast divide that separates white feminists from black feminists, we didn't get to talk about the power and problematic dynamic of respectability politics. But that is one of the huge anchors for African American women, Latino women, Asian working class women, immigrant women, being so ensconced in religious structures. And again, viewing religious structures as the only viable means for leverage, for visibility, for voice, for agency, in other words. So we're really looking at how do we forge self-determination that is humanistic, that is encompassing of all of our complexities and all of our commitment to lifting up intersectional struggle, and that's going to continue to be the conversation for the course of the weekend. Thank you so much for coming.